Now, as we're talking about this, I can't help but feel like I have to ask you about something that I find a little concerning with, the modern day civil rights movement, as we put it, right? And I'm talking about more my generation. So there's been something worrying. There's an underbelly happening right now on the internet. When you go to audio apps and audio social media platforms such as Clubhouse, Twitter Spaces, Discord, where people go and you don't see them, you just hear them speak. It's kind of like a podcast, but it's happening in real time, and people get on a virtual stage and speak.
Sure.
But there is a movement right now, and it's sort of centered around, they call it delineation, and they want to delineate African Americans from all other black people. And also that, I believe they call themselves ADOS, but I'm not sure if that's, the ones who speak in these apps, they do. And their whole thing is they would like to see, or they talk about not wanting us here, immigrants who are black. And the whole,
horrible.
Yeah, it really is. And it causes a lot of dissension, and you see people arguing, and a lot of hurtful things are said. But I think back to your father's movement and how I think people either are not aware, again, this is what happened when history is not accurately told, how the civil rights movement was running concurrently with our struggle for independence all over Africa, right?
Correct.
And your father was one of the people who were very involved with working with young African leaders. So for example, he was very close with the late Tom Mboya, who was a young Kenyan politician at the time.
Yeah.
And it just struck me yesterday, if it was not for your father, America would not have had its first black president.
Yes, that's right.
It's like literally, if he hadn't gotten together with that young politician called Tom Mboya and started that education program,
that's right,
where they picked the most brilliant minds in Kenya to come and study here so that they could go back home and build a country. One of the young men chosen for that program was Barack Obama Sr.
Correct.
And thanks to him, America got its first black president.
That's right.
And that blew my mind. And then the fact that he also was around to see it happen, does he think it's a big deal? Does he realize it? Like literally, he is the reason America had.
Well, he along with a few others.
Right.
But he did have a lot to do with that. And strangely enough, it was a woman by the name of Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yes.
That was his femtor at the time, and she
I like that, femtor.
Introduced him to much of the plight on the African continent and a lot of those leaders. And but wait, I just want to go back before we talk about that to your earlier point, because there's much division.
Exactly.
There's much division because so much of the black community comes from a place of lack instead of abundance. I mean, ultimately, all of us in America are immigrants, whether we were forcibly brought here or whether we chose to come here.
Right.
And I think that the African American experience is a very unique one based on slavery, but then you have black from the diaspora immigrants that have been coming here for lineages and for a very long time. And so for black people to try and divide us and to compartmentalize us is just for me a deeper awakening to the level of trauma that is just passed on through generation, because we all should really be coming together no matter what, and find ways in which to uplift each other and to find joy in learning about our different cultures and our different foods and textures and the writers and the literature of all of these different places that we call the African experience. Whether it's American or African Venezuelan or African Kenyan or African
Brazilian,
wherever. So it pains me to hear that people are using social media platforms to divide us.
It's a really scary rhetoric, I'm not going to lie to you. It's a really violent rhetoric, and I think it comes from a place of ignorance on the part of where history is told, because if it gets to a point where we feel like now we need to fight each other, we're still very far from getting to where your father wanted us to be, right?
Right, of course.
And again, so the reason why I wanted to bring it up is what they did so beautifully back then was recognize that we all were much stronger together.
Yes.
And the experiences are very different. I will never, as a Kenyan, born and raised in Kenya, understand the plight of an African American. I can look into it, do my best to understand it, but I'll never 100%, and vice versa. But I think I've always thought it would be such a nice exchange. And I remember thinking, maybe one day, if I'm blessed enough, I'd love to have a program where it could be like a student exchange program, for example. What if young men and women in their teens got a chance to go and experience high school, even if it's in a boarding school in Africa? There's something about going to Africa that just
That's true.
centers everything, right? And then and also we're always being so influenced by African American culture as it stands. But what we're starting to learn with the internet is there's a lot of influence to be had from the motherland too.
Of course.
So I'm hoping that will not prevail, and we'll go back to that togetherness and learning from each other.
And I would also argue that regardless of where you're particularly from,
Right.
if no one hears your sound and
Right.
your voice, you walk through the world as a black woman.
Absolutely.
So you do confront the same things that
In a lot of
African
ways.
American women
Absolutely.
confront, because people don't know where you're from, or
Yes.
who are
Nobody
seeing
can
you.
tell us apart when we walk into a room.
Exactly.
If I
and,
raise, yeah.
and ultimately, when we bleed blood, it's all the same red
Yes,
color.
Yes. So,
So-
no, I'm sorry, I had to ask that question because it's something that I'm not sure if it's really taken root yet, but to people who are involved in these apps, it's a discussion that's being had daily. There was a room on Twitter just last week with 40,000 listeners listening live that went on for 3 days, and it was such a heartful conversation, hearing black people from all over the world just going at each other. It was sad. So I'm happy to have the opportunity to sit with you. So hopefully you guys can wake up and listen to what we need to be doing. So thank you for that. No, really, thank you for that. I know, does it get tiring hearing every time you sit down, people want to talk about your father?
No, I mean, my father is a fascinating person, and he's an incredible
really
guy,
is,
and
yeah.
I'm a big fan of myself, and I worked with him throughout my life in different ways. I was his acting coach on 4 or 5 different projects.
He still needs an acting coach, even though he's the Harry Belafonte?
Well, he hadn't been in front of the camera for 17 years, and
Wow.
he asked me to join him on a film that he did called White Man's Burden. And then after we did that film, he asked me to do all the other films that came after that with him.
Wow.
I think, artists are always
Evolving.
changing, learning, figuring things out. And my father has always been one to stay current. So whether it was me working with him or other young people that have worked beside him doing other things, he's always been very engaged with young people and younger generations to
Yes.
keep himself current, and also to pass on his wisdom and his knowledge.
Wow. I mean, I can only imagine, like, you saying that you're his fan and you know him so well, you can imagine what it's like for the rest of us. Because I thought I knew a lot about Harry Belafonte until I really dug deep, and I'm like, wow, what a life he's lived.
See the film Sing Your Song if you haven't already.
Yes, Sing Your Song, you guys. It's on Amazon. It's on Amazon Prime. That's where I got it. I was just blown away. He started off as a jazz singer, right? And he was doing really well, but then he decided, nah, I want to do something different. Went into theater, and then the calypso sound that he popularized, and amazing songs like "Damn, me said it," and then, but it was just really nice the way the story was told, showing his entertainment side, and then also how that was interacting with his life as a black man in America.
Yeah. Well, that's due really to the brilliance of Suzanne Rostock, who was the editor-director for that. She really figured out how to take all of the footage that we accumulated and all of the archival stuff that was brought to us by Helen Weiss, amazing archivist, and really arc a story, a beautiful story.
It was beautiful. It was so beautiful, you guys. It takes you through his entire life as an entertainer, and then when it gets to a point, it shows you, while this was happening on screen and it was all nice and dandy, in the real world, this was happening. So for example, you go to see him in Las Vegas, you see an amazing show, he's the headliner, but he's not allowed to stay in the same hotel that he's performing at.
Right.
He has to go stay at some shacks.
Okay. Well, don't tell them the whole story. Go see it.
Yes, let me not do that. It was just it was a lot of, yeah, but basically I had no idea that he had faced such horrific racism as well. I think people would think, oh, he was this big star, so he was spared from it, but it was actually...
No, because my father comes from a family of poverty. My grandmother, came to this country and was a domestic worker.
Right.
And struggled often to make sure the bills were paid and food was on the table. His uncle, however, became well known in the Harlem community. He was a numbers runner. Oh. And if you don't know what that is, you better ask somebody. But so he came from a very interesting childhood. And also in his early days, his mother brought him back to Jamaica, because she feared for him being around here. Sorry, I got something in my eye. But she, was very conscious of making sure he had his roots, in him.
Right.
But she would drag him around when he was in New York to the steps of Harlem to listen to Marcus Garvey, to listen to W.E.B. Du Bois, and so he was very ingrained in social justice activism before he even became an artist.
Absolutely.
And I think coming back after the war, seeing how people were treated and taking advantage of the GI Bill and being able to go into, to get education. When he was gifted these tickets to the theater, and when he went to the theater and then all of a sudden saw that this was a platform and a space where the stories could be told, that needed to be told of our community, he knew that that's where he wanted to sort of rest his career.
He was an activist before he was an actor, because we all thought he was an actor, then the activism came.
Right, no.
So the activism drove him into acting because he wanted to use that platform.
Yes.
How incredible, because he did exactly that. And everybody would ask, why is he doing this? He doesn't need to do this. He could live up somewhere in the Hollywood Hills and just be aloof. I mean, you have entertainers today who during the Black Lives Matter movement, they said, what does that have to do with me?
Yeah.
I'm here in Beverly Hills with the white people. I don't care, but that's really... So if you're an activist, you might not have thought about it, but if you're also talented, you might want to consider Hollywood. Be a huge star. Be today's Harry Belafonte, and then people will listen to what you have to say.